This meeting is being recorded. This is the Affordable Housing Committee meeting of August 9th, 2023. We're meeting both in the Old Town Hall conference room as well as via Zoom. We have in the room our chair, Ron Cooler, and Bob Ellwanger, member, as well as our guest speaker, Aisha Woods, myself, Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development, and Gretchen Burton, our recording secretary. And I know we have online several committee members as well as other guests. We have Gwen Alperovich and Nina Velez from the committee and other members of the public and guests. So I think I'll turn things over to you. It's 7:05 is our official call to order, I guess, and turn things over to the chair.
Okay, Mark. Welcome, everyone. First item of business will be welcome and introductions, and I think we've already done that. We're delighted to have Aisha here with us tonight. Here comes Janice.
Hi.
Hi, Janice.
Hi, Janice.
We just did introduction.
Oh, I'm Janice.
Janice is here, everyone. Janice, this is Aisha, who will be our guest speaker tonight from FCCHO. So, I guess first item then, beyond that, will be review of the minutes from the July 12th meeting. So, anyone have any observations on the minutes?
Thank you, Gretchen.
Thank you, Gretchen. I move to approve.
I had one thing and this is the smallest of issues, but under Affordable Housing Plan, I'm listed as having suggested we work with planning and zoning to increase set-aside requirements. I thought that had to do with increasing rezoning for middle housing.
Well, we can change it however you want. We should, this is always a risk because we don't really have to record the actual. She says since we have a recording of it.
And I'm not really concerned about making change.
I know we were talking about like increasing the inclusionary provision.
Right.
So I think that was what it was. I don't know.
Yeah. So in other words, what they're doing is and we have a draft now of the POCD, but they would rezone certain areas from B to C and A to B, basically, to give us more potential to get more units in some of them. But it's somewhat limited. What I've been on a soapbox for is let's do more of this. Let's not be so.
Would you like to change it to something else?
Why don't we, if we could say, he suggested working with planning and zoning to increase
Middle housing opportunities, is that what you wanted?
to increase middle housing, to increase middle housing opportunities.
Anyone have any objection to that? Okay, we'll make that correction. Follow the town clerk. Assuming everyone will. Any other changes?
Everyone in favor?
Mm-hmm.
Can I assume everyone's in favor?
Sure.
Great.
Nice.
Okay, then I think the next item is our guest speaker. So
Great.
Again, welcome, Aisha, and we're delighted to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and I know that many of you have met Christy and are, a little bit familiar with the work that we'll do. So I hope that I'm just going to, do a very short presentation and hopefully leave some room for discussion.
Can everyone online both see the screen and hear Aisha?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I've accomplished
Everything's
technology.
perfect.
Yay. Hey.
Yeah, and first of all, I had mentioned earlier, I came down a little bit early and did a you know, a self-guided neighborhood tour, and I'm just, you know, I was really impressed with kind of the diversity of housing options that you see in the neighborhood. So you see smaller homes, larger homes, and, you know, some mixes of two families. So, and also, just, you know, in refamiliarizing myself with the work all of you have done on your initial affordable housing plan, and also some of the updates I'm really impressed and appreciative of the work that this committee has done for Fairfield. So very briefly, I'm Aisha Woods. My background is planning and architecture. I've been in this role for about a year now, filling the big shoes of Christy Stewart. And so I really come, you know, from a planning perspective to this. I was also in municipal government before I took this role, so I'm also very familiar about how long and how much persistence it takes to get some changes. So I'll just do a quick intro to the Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunity. We're basically a coordinated regional response to address shortage of housing in Fairfield County. And we do this through facilitating production, preservation, and protection of a whole range of housing opportunities. And we really believe access to safe, healthy housing is fundamental for thriving communities. So this is kind of our driving mission. This is also on our website. And just very quickly to explain who we are, the Center for Housing Opportunities is a partnership between RPA Regional Plan Association, the Housing Collective, and Partnerships for Strong Communities. There's 3 centers. So there's the Fairfield County Center is the oldest. It's 5 years old. Litchfield County Center has been around for about 2 years, and we just opened a new center in Eastern Connecticut this year. And it's all sort of under the umbrella of Centers for Housing Opportunity. Our regional footprints are really determined by our relationships with local community foundations and other institutional partners. So in Fairfield County, we're very much aligned with the mission of Fairfield County's Community Foundation and work closely with them. And so our strategic priorities are, you know, as was indicated in the mission statement, capacity building, technical assistance, also community engagement, coalition building. We do a lot of data and research, and recently the Housing Collective revived their Housing Innovation Lab, so we're really looking forward to seeing how we can collaborate with them on, you know, building out research. And of course, RPA and partnerships are leaders in research on affordable housing issues. And finally, communication and narrative change. We're constantly both exploring what is most effective messaging, but also trying to give out tools to have, you know, to speak with one voice as a community and have consistent messaging around our housing needs. So just very briefly, our capacity building and technical assistance kind of falls under Housing Opportunity Accelerator, and that includes working with community organizations, local governments, and as well as developers on direct technical assistance. So for example, feasibility studies, grant writing assistance, land use board training, and then also in these technical working groups, so we have a developer roundtable, we have a ADU small multifamily workshop, and I'll spend a minute on that because Mark thought you might be interested in that. It's a group of, there's some town practitioners, there's a builder, there's a banking representative, some entrepreneurs, and we've just, you know, started these workshops up again, so they're in their early phases, they're more kind of defining the problem, but the goal is really to move quickly to a financing strategy, maybe even a pilot program to help improve the uptake of ADUs. And so I can share more information about that. RPA is also doing another generation of the research they did, looking at the capacity for Fairfield County and what ADUs could add to the housing landscape. So we're piggybacking with their research project and really kind of trying to do a deep dive tactical approach to like what is the secret sauce to getting some ADUs built. And you know, we're finding it has to do with money mostly. So, but at least defining what that gap is, I think will be helpful. And then on the engagement and coalition building, you probably are all familiar with the Fairfield County Housing Alliance, which is our big umbrella. We also do monthly presentations as the Housing Equity Coalition, which really focuses on residents' perspectives. So it's really led by some residents who live in public housing in Bridgeport, also immigrants' rights. To Make the Road, we work with Connecticut Fair Housing Center and PT Partners, are basically the co-leaders of that. Fairfield County Talks Housing is one of our, you know, I guess, what's the word? Signature programs. And Yvonne Klein she's transitioned out of her day job to really focus on that. So I'm really excited about what she comes up with this fall and over the year. And we're also in very early stages of faith-based outreach programs. Okay, just very quickly, and I'm gonna, because the type is so small, these are we sent out an affordable housing plan implementation survey to all the Fairfield County towns, and about half have responded now. Most of them said, yes, we will. We're a little busy right now, so we're just like waiting for the rest of the responses. But, you know, there's some good news and some mixed news. Most towns do have an active affordable housing committee. Most have adopted some new zoning regulations or are in process. Some have adopted other measures that were identified in their affordable housing plan. It looks like the community engagement process is still a little tentative, and that's always a heavy lift, I know, from the, you know, public official perspective. And we did ask, you know, have any projects moved forward, and obviously understanding the timeline of a typical development project, it makes sense that, you know, in most cases they haven't been able to start new projects, but, you know, they may be underway. And so we're encouraged by this, and the main barriers include land costs, which you're familiar with, in some cases zoning, public center, and others, you know, there's a range of other barriers, but they seem to be less, you know, less important as some of the financial and the regulatory issues. And then, so we also asked, well, what kind of help could you use the most in implementing your affordable housing plan? And so this is just, you know, a graph. Again, it's about half the towns. So definitely, you know, board and commissions training was high, research and data was high, and then also information about funding sources. A little bit zoning analysis. So these are good for us to think about too. So we really kind of hone our efforts accordingly to what towns need. And I think that's the end.
That's your last slide.
That's the end. I have more detailed information about our partner orgs and also about some examples from the work plan in there, but we don't have to
Yeah.
get into detail on that. And I just want to acknowledge Adam, who's on the phone, who really has been driving the survey and calling up towns to have them put out.
Anyone have any questions on that?
How many towns have completed the survey?
So I think we're up to 11 or 12 now. Some towns, this is all from our Google Docs, some towns were having problems with the Google, their .gov didn't like it, so we did a SurveyMonkey survey as well. So we have to collate,
And I know you evaluated and put out a scorecard for those plans that you received and reviewed, and we sort of got a C or C plus, I guess.
Yeah.
Stanford scored higher. Were there other towns within the county that did as well or better than Stanford? And what was it that Stanford did that others like us didn't do or did less of?
Yeah, so that was the scorecard, research was done last summer, and it was really, a desktop research process, like really, evaluating the plans, apples to apples as much as possible, and I think Stanford got points for,
More equity and inclusion.
yeah, more equity and inclusion, so being, more intentional about including as many voices as possible and addressing, racial inequities in housing. And I think they were also they also they had a consultant work with them on their plans. It was pretty meaty.
It was a big plan.
Yeah, it was a big plan.
Oh, yeah.
And they're a big city, so,
Sure.
maybe,
Yeah.
and this survey that we're doing now is we're really asking the towns to self-report on what their progress is. So it's not gonna be, we're not gonna do another set of scorecards. It's more to celebrate successes, like, yay, this is going well.
I think we had a
or-
solid B, Bob.
That would be, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, B minus.
Wait, Mark was
I
invited.
think we were like the
As
secretary.
As
a
It was
representative
better.
to talk
Middle of the
about.
pack.
Definitely were less,
Yeah.
it was better than that.
Yeah.
This is the meeting down at the church in Westport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we celebrated Fairfield.
Did you also do it for Litchfield? This is just Fairfield?
Litchfield,
scorecard,
we
no.
did not do the scorecard,
Okay.
and my colleague Jocelyn Ayer actually wrote most of the plans. So I don't know. if
We
that's
know that some of the towns were a bit slow in
Yeah.
meeting the June 22
Yeah, you really.
deadline.
Yeah, and I think,
Yeah.
well, Norwalk, for example, has not submitted theirs yet, but they really decided to take a longer, deeper dive in it, and so, that's understandable. They have a lot of development, a lot of We are gonna do the scorecards for the 43 towns in,
Okay.
yeah.
I know you touched on it, but I know this group we did revise our regulations to allow for opportunities to create ADUs, and we have, at last count, almost 2 here. Not all of which, obviously, after this, I think we only 10 or so new ADUs after the regulations were more liberal. But we did Bob was the MC at a workshop, a workshop last year, which had a person who had just recently done an ADU,
Yeah.
was in the process of doing an ADU, planning and zoning staff to talk about the regulatory, and do something like that. I know that any best practices that are identified as a working group, pilot project, I'm sure very interested in throwing our hat in the ring.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we feel that we really need to do this every year, because I'm sure if we sampled the community, we've tried that a very small portion of the people would be able to spell ADU. And it's the type of thing that really needs to be refreshed and publicized. We're gonna use every opportunity to do that.
We had great turnout. We had 65 people, I think, in the room, but, you know, it's a town of 60,000 people, so.
Yeah, but that's
We've touched
cool.
a small fraction, so.
Yeah, that's still a great.
And we
Well, I mean, I think getting the word out too is you know, that's part of the process. New Haven put together a toolkit that's on their website, so that makes it really easy for, you know, people to understand what the process
Sure.
is and know that it's available. But then I think also educating like banks and, educating, you know, lenders and appraisers. There's
You mentioned RPA's researching, when would they have that, or is that sort of ongoing?
I think it's, they're doing a big push on the research this summer in terms of a survey of actually policies across the country.
Oh.
And then they're gonna get more into implementation, do a couple case studies of Connecticut. So if you know, you can advocate for Fairfield to be one of those case studies, or I don't know. I think they're trying to do a large community, mid-sized community, and a small community for their case study.
I wanted to ask you about research, and maybe you could hit some of the highlights of the research that, I mean, we've seen some of it, but it would be great to get maybe a better feel for the research that you do and publish.
Sure. So, all of our studies are on our website. And the initial, you know, the kind of mother lode that, you know, I think kicked off Centers for Housing Opportunity is the study that Christy worked on, with the Urban Land Institute called, Housing Connecticut's Future. So, and that was done through a grant housing. That was done, I think before the pandemic, so one of the things that we're hoping to do is refresh some of the data. For those bigger research projects, we typically partner with either RPA, with one of our direct partners, or with another research organization, just because they have the capacity to do the research, and then we support on the ground. We also do our own small mini research projects. Norwalk Common Council Housing Subcommittee was really curious about how do you structure affordable home ownership deed restrictions so they don't penalize people over the long run, so they allow for some wealth building, even though the properties are kept at affordable rates. We did some research around that, and put together a small presentation.
Is that also on your website too?
That is not yet on the website. We have a draft fact sheet for public
That's always
consumption.
one of the things
Yeah.
we struggle with too, is, we have formulas for it, but it's, no,
Yeah.
there's always.
Yeah, and there's some, it lays out some pros and cons for the different approaches. So that's an example of like a.
Yeah, you did talk about like technical assistance, and that's an example of such. So if we're struggling with the particular issues, that's a service available to.
Yeah.
Trying to, there's some things that we've been doing a little research on our own. I know groups have been talking to Stanford and communities to find out, how do you do this?
Yeah, and we approach, something like that, deep dive as in a way that would be a useful tool for all towns. It might vary a little bit depending on context and market. Yeah, so we're happy to do that. For the, for broader based research, we've revived our, housing innovation lab. And so that looks at, you know, kind of broader metrics on things. And they're also work with the Housing Collective on, metrics around homelessness. So that's been their initial focus, but they'll also be working with housing affordability.
Yeah, and housing needs,
Yeah, and
Needs
housing
assessment,
needs,
yep.
needs.
use some of that data.
Yeah, and so we are hoping to update that because things, and we're also working on that for other centers, which Fairfield County is probably the most well-resourced, center at this point in terms of data that's already been.
I also wanted to ask about the data from developers that you mentioned in
Yeah.
the website. That's really very interesting to us.
Yeah.
Because we'd like to actually increase our set-aside percentages, but we know it's more expensive for developers now, and any kind of insight that we could get would be helpful in terms of how far we can really push the envelope
Yeah.
with them.
That's a really great question, and like inclusionary zoning policies should have some kind of pro forma and, you know, what the market can reason. So, and that's sort of a pretty specialized analysis.
It has to be updated fairly regularly, depending.
Yeah,
on
and it has to
conditions.
be updated yearly.
Yep.
Because, you know, market boundaries change, you know, maybe dependent on, so there are some tools out there. They're actually, I think, Grounded Solutions has a tool where you can plug in some numbers and just to test whether your inclusionary, percentage is reasonable for, but then, you know, it's also.
It's all the underlying assumptions that go into it.
Yeah.
You've got great formulas, but you
Yeah.
have to make sure your assumptions are.
Yeah, and you have to, you know, also it should be goal-driven and not just, you know, entirely market-driven. We are doing a survey, a developer survey similar to this, to try and put together a sense of a pipeline in Fairfield County, you know, both of assisted housing and of, you know, just market rate housing, to see how that measures.
Will any of this information be available to towns like us to, I realize there's some proprietary information that you want to maintain, but is there any at least aggregate information that we would be able to tap into?
Absolutely, yeah, we will be, we just started the developer survey, and obviously we're not gonna ask, you know, make all their financials public, but but we wanna also see where they're seeing the, biggest barriers, and where their cost gaps are, and just to get a sense of like, what projects are we expecting to see years.
So you're including nonprofit developers as well?
Nonprofit and for-profit developers who are sort of aligned, value aligned.
Gotcha.
Not good. You know, we're not gonna spend a lot of time folks who are doing quite fine and value aligned.
Any questions from, the group joining us via Zoom?
No,
Hopefully
this is
everyone-
great information.
Okay, good.
And your office is Bridgeport?
We're in Bridgeport. I'm assuming Mark's gonna distribute the
I have-
PowerPoint.
Yep.
My email and Adam's email is the FCC.
Okay,
There about,
great, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
so much.
You're welcome to stick around if you'd like.
I will, stick around
Yeah.
because I'm very interested in hearing about your affordable housing plan.
Sure.
I'll be
Thank you.
quiet.
Herb,
Yeah.
let's,
Guess I'm on the spot.
That's
Take it back to Earth.
why we're here.
Here it is, Herb.
Yeah, there is.
Thank you so much, again, for that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's great to have you, really, it's great to have you. And we look forward to staying in touch on a continuing basis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so next item we have is discussion of our plan and timeline. And this, Aisha, usually winds up being a rather circuitous discussion, so bear with us, if you will. But we have, we have two overall goals, and that was to, provide a broad range of housing options and, you know, locations to grow our housing, address our housing needs. And then secondly, we'd like to get a first 4-year moratorium from 830G, and then build on that. So those are two, and much of that's in response to the community. I mean, this is really a hot item of the community. And we actually have quite a bit, as I think you know, 830G, a project, built in town. And sometimes it winds up getting clustered in certain areas, which isn't, you know, which is another matter of concern. So sort of two overall, I guess, things that are sort of pushing us. And we developed, a series of strategies, what we call Tier 1, Tier 2, and also supporting strategies. And right now we're working on, I guess 4 of these, and we threw another one in, and that other one is outreach and communication, so we can really develop a much better, a higher profile in the community, and also educate the community on a broadened basis. And we actually have a task force now that we're appointing to really focus on outreach and communication. And one element of that will be this roughly October seminar on ADUs that but we've got a lot more planned between now and the first half of next year. We're gonna actually talk about that in a minute. The first goal that was in our sights for this year was increasing the set-aside requirements. And we had hoped to get to perhaps as high as 15%. And that's one reason why I asked the question before about research. We're feeling some pushback about increasing it. We actually use 10% generally, and this is projects of 10 units or more, and higher in the transit-oriented district. In addition to that, we have an inclusionary zoning fee of $5 per thousand that we use as another tool. So we're trying to get more information now, I guess, from other communities and see what they've experienced, and it's all over the place. We're also trying to evaluate not just the percentages they give us, but are projects actually getting built with these numbers. So to that end, we just spoke with Westport, we spoke with Stanford last week. This was last week. Yeah. And we're talking to other communities as well to try to learn as much as we can. But right now we haven't pulled the trigger on.
Well, part of it
is
too that we're in the midst of updating. Feedback we've received from both the commission and staff is let's finish work on our POCD, which will talk more broadly about our housing goals, housing plan. We we talk about any further text and implement what would be strategies in the conservation development. So that was one aspect, and then clearly from the development community, Norwalk was very similar when they had, based on current economic conditions, going too much higher will likely not make projects less feasible. And the other thing we recognize, and many communities have done some of this work already, that's why we talked to Westport and Stanford, financial factors there are different than they are just one town over, even though our housing market is very similar to Norwalk and Westport, not in that same income bracket. So, projects that might pencil out differently because the market rate units or affordable units are much higher. So we're at 10 and 12% in the TOD district, higher in the TOD district, where we provide for increased densities. And the other thing we haven't really talked about is, we start our 10% town-wide based on developments that result in approach could be reducing, threshold that's lower than that. So, 5, any project. So, not typically. So there's a couple of different ways to approach it, but I think we've kind of reached a point where we're waiting for the POCD to be completed, which we're anticipating by October, because there's a whole thing called election in November, so Janice knows all about it. So that's where we are with the set aside. So then we've turned our sights. A lot of what we do is look at strategies that have a zoning component. We want to talk about middle housing and
Absolutely, that's one of the other
zoning.
things we've done a lot of work, middle housing. Mark's done an incredible amount of work on identifying opportunities, working with developers, buying property, and then, planning to deed restrict it, owned by the town, and made available for long-term lease by the property owners. And one thing we've really been interested in is potentially rezoning. So I mentioned before that some of the POC draft calls for rezoning from zone A to B, certain section, and then B to C, other section. We'd really like to see that a more aggressive posture taken, but reading the political tea leaves, our town folks feel that we ought to take a stepped approach.
More measured incremental approach, which tends to be the difference.
Yeah, so, and as they mentioned to us, the POCD might not be revised for 10 years, but we can do all kinds of rezoning once we get, past the stage.
So one of the things that started this was we had tremendous amount of support within the community to do so-called missing middle housing, 2 to 4 family, 6 family units. And we have examples of that in town. People like it. Just don't have a lot of examples. Like to do more. So one of the things we discovered was that in a lot of properties that don't meet the additional requirements for lot size for a multifamily unit were non-conforming use, and no one, they were not the right lot size, but variances were routinely granted, and no one's the wiser. Everyone says that's perfectly fine for that neighborhood. So it started a conversation in this group about, well, instead of a 9,000 square foot lot for a 6,000 square foot lot in the B zone. And so that's been part of the conversation as well. But we, again, like the set aside requirements, and we used to have a DRD overlay zone, which was a major contributor to more dense housing, provided it met certain requirements, and allowed for a lot of condominium development at one time in town, which again, people think of as part of the community, so would like to see us. But at some point in the last 20 years, it was dialed back, so it was more restrictive, and we'd like to up again to provide more opportunities. So all three of these things are very zoning related, and we've gotten to a point where we've had really good conversations with the commission and staff, and there seems to be general support for it, but we're waiting for the POCD to be developed so that we can propose a text amendment. That's been the advice we've received back, which is...
We've also done some limited study of town-owned land that might be able to be repurposed with this end, and another objective, which is to work more closely with our housing authority in terms of facilitating opportunities, looking for opportunities for them, which Mark is always on the alert to try to accomplish. Haven't gotten so far with that because there typically are some obstacles, but I think it's inevitable that we need to continue to work that angle. So that's part of our objectives as well. I think we've covered most of the.
You sleeping?
Yeah, I think we've covered
You've been out the whole
most
time?
of the short-term strategy.
Hey, Marty, I think we're hearing you in the background.
The other one, though, that we haven't really talked about yet is the Housing Trust Fund, and we want to develop guidelines for the Housing Trust Fund that are not set in concrete, that give us flexibility, but maybe more usable guidelines than us always having to make, seat of the pants type decisions in terms of the opportunities that emerge. So that's one thing that we'd like to do in advance of this additional one I mentioned before was the outreach. So Bob and Janice and I were planning to work on in very close consultation with Mark, and putting together sort of a communication program, outreach program over the next, say, 8 months or so, that would include items like the ADU seminar, and and that prefaced by communication that would get people to the seminar and reading up about ADUs, and then moving on to ultimately a broader community discussion of what the Affordable Housing Committee is doing, what the role of the committee is, the documenting the need for affordable housing, and also explaining the Housing Trust Fund, and hopefully getting people
for your dollars.
open their wallets. So that's going to be a key part. We think that will support everything else that we do.
Yeah.
So so I think on the Housing Trust Fund, you had the conversation. You guys and Steve talked to Stanford about their Housing Trust Fund?
Irvin and I did, yeah.
Yeah, Bob and I did. Steve wasn't able to make it, but
Yeah.
we had a pretty good discussion.
They're just getting theirs underway.
So I got the impression looking at it, and I hadn't talked to him, so I'm glad you did reach out to him. Seems much more refined than what you had with. They had a lot of information posted. I wasn't sure to what
It's very
degree.
aspirational.
Very aspirational.
And Emily Gordon, we spoke with in Stanford, she's actually really just recently transitioning over to be the point person in housing, moving from a community development role.
Yeah.
And she's actually very interested in what we're doing, and I think we'll be able to converse with her and share ideas going forward. But there are a lot of wonderful ideas in that plan, but it's early they're early days, for sure.
Yeah.
So initially, as we created the housing trust fund, we wanted to hold off and really casting in stone, like doing an open solicitation of projects until we kind of, most of the projects that we've supported through that have been town-sponsored.
Mhm.
So that the town has been purchasing land, partnering with developer projects. So we have two that we're working on right now. One is, Habit first property, because it happened to be an existing town property. Then we're now. The other is, Parkview Commons, the Navy housing site, which was, and still is, affordable home ownership, but is in a flood zone. And so post Sandy, we've been trying to figure out a way in which we initially explored funding through more traditional sources, subsidy sources, but always ran into the competing public policy goals of thou shalt not intensify use in a flood zone. But in order to get our money, we want you to intensify, not just preserve units, but actually expand affordable housing. And that largely led us to create a funding mechanism at the local level, so that we wouldn't have to ask. We've been on a campaign to acquire property and aggregate that, and then we're out to RFQ right now for a development partner.
One thing that, and there were quite a few items we discussed with Emily, and I can, maybe the easiest thing to do is to make it available to the committee, so the committee can look at it offline, the summary that we did.
Sure.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know you had a summary.
We'll do that. Well, the one we sent to you.
The email that
When we sent to you, so
yeah.
we'll send that to the committee, but, we can certainly touch on some of that now, but one item we did talk about was parking, and, Bob, and this is something that Mark's been championing, in potentially reclaiming, parking, excessive parking, and for even more than affordable housing. I mean, just
Yeah.
environmental purposes and commercial purposes and so forth. We have some very markedly overparked areas, don't we?
Yeah,
And
I've actually quantified some of that.
yeah, Bob's quantified, so this might be a good time for,
You wanna, okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Oh, disabled, you disabled screen
I
sharing.
didn't think, here, very good, try that.
All right, here we go. Here we go.
There we go.
There we go. Share my screen. So for the folks on Zoom, hopefully you can see that. For the folks here, I have a copy that you can also, look at. Turn those down. There we go. As Herb has mentioned, this was prompted by some earlier discussions as to the utilization of large commercial, retail, professional, off-street parking. So the last couple of weeks, thanks to a data tool that I now have access to, I've actually been able to not only just identify, and we started to create a spreadsheet of some of these properties, but I've actually been able to go and get data points going back 10 years for select locations within town. And the top line is that we have an overabundance of off-street parking, and much of it is underutilized.
Surprise.
No surprise, but to be able to put data to it, and so you can see the trend lines, and the trend lines include pre and post COVID, as a matter of fact. So really what I want to do is share that information that I have, and the whole purpose obviously was to put some parameters and datas around this, and identify properties that have high utilization rates. High may mean 50 to 60%, by the way. It doesn't mean 90%, not in any case, do we come close to that. But there may be alternative uses for that where we do have some available capacity, and I'll share some examples of that. And there might be some changes we might want to suggest to the commission. I know in the draft of the P O C D, they already have, indicated, recommending to change from 5, spaces per thousand for the DCD district down to 4. I think they can go a little lower, but that's certainly, they're going in the right direction. So to start off with, here are the 16, biggest properties, in town. And so, you know, we all shop and live and work and play here. Off the top of your head, which of these strike you as the largest? Any guesses? Which would be the largest? By far, actually, not even close.
BJ's is huge.
BJ's is huge,
How about Aldi and Home?
but it's not the largest.
Aldi
Aldi is huge, but
and-
not the largest,
Okay.
yeah.
The Stop and Shop is pretty huge, too.
800 Villa Avenue,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's the one I'm
Because you
at.
got Stop and Shop, you got Planet Fitness, you got Nutmeg Bowl, you got Fairfield County Bank, all sharing 16.7 acres.
And do you see that
of
little
land.
parking area that no one uses on the?
Yeah, it's chained off.
Yeah.
And then conversely, I included, and I'm not gonna share research on all of these, I'm gonna pick 7 or 8 of them, but, the smallest of these is, now vacant, Bed Bath & Beyond, with 180 spaces. So my focus was to take the ones that had 300 or more, and there's about 11 of them. And so, able to use some technology that retains Google Earth images, and that's really what Nearmap does, .com. It captures, so Google Earth, a couple of times during the year, once or twice in the spring, once or twice in the fall, they update what you see when you go into Google Earth. Well, this Nearmap saves that, so you can go back, and, as far back as I could go, using it was, 2014. So you can see I chose, one particular, day in each year, going back 10 years, looking for a mix of, spring and fall, a mix of weekday, weekends. And so for each of those, taking those aerial views, I was able then to actually count how many cars are parked on the property. And so,
My login credentials back.
it's like, you know, you've done a lot of using your login, Mark, but thank you for that. So,
Tapped out, Mark.
so we go from 16 to 11, and here are the,
I wasn't gonna count the cars.
you know, and it wasn't that hard to do because there's so many vacant spaces. But I had to obviously start by counting how many spaces there are, so that was the starting point. So you can see here on this slide, we've got a total of 4,500, off-street parking, uncovered parking, because a couple of these locations do have covered parking. They have garages, Nutmeg Bowl,
Yep.
Save the Children, 2 good examples of that. But, you know, every parking space it's 9 by 18, that's 162 square feet. You do the math, just of the parking spaces, those 4,500, that comes out to 17 acres, and it doesn't include the lanes between the parking spaces, which would bring it up to probably 30 acres.
So 782 doesn't include the covered parking.
No, doesn't include covered parking, because, Save the Children has 146 covered spaces, Nutmeg Goals has 38. And I think that's about, and also up on Old Navy has some, parking behind the paper store. They've got a parking garage, and then behind Old Navy, there's that swim
Yep.
outfit, Wings Over Water, and there's a little garage there with
Yep.
like 8.5 spaces. So we're talking about potentially a large universe. And when I go back in time for each of these places, you can see here, Villa Avenue is the biggest, 782, going down to, 300, Stilson Plaza on the Black Rock Turnpike. And obviously, these are located in our DCD corridor, with one exception, BJ's is designed industrial, but the rest are in the DCD zone. And you can see, I've ranked them from the greatest utilization to the least. So, clearly, for those, and I go to ShopRite, 7 times out of a week, 'cause I don't live that far. That's a tough parking lot sometimes, right? And that has the greatest utilization over the 10 years, but it's only at 62%. And that includes weekdays, weekends, spring and fall. And you go down to the least, the 3 with the least have less than or equal to 20% or 21%, utilization. So there are some opportunities, no question.
Just to clarify one
Yep.
more. The 543 for BJ's
Yep.
is just the upper deck.
Just the upper deck. I didn't who parks in the,
No one.
because the Bullard Square, the
So
movie,
it's really
is-
double that.
it's really double that, but, if you look at the field cards, it's a separate, there are two separate field cards, one for the, theater, Fairfield Theater, that's vacant. And, you're absolutely right, nobody parks there for.
Or in the back.
Or in the back, nobody. I only did I couldn't observe cars parked underneath, right? So I couldn't count.
Okay, just making sure.
But you're absolutely right, that
When you
only,
say capacity, it's actually.
I'll show, it's
It's a-
yes,
it's a-
visible, it's really uncovered, parking
Yeah,
capacity.
okay.
Yeah. So again, you can
Cool.
see the list. I'm gonna go through briefly, on page 6, and you can see the trend lines. So again, Black Rock Turnpike, ShopRite, Pearl Vision, Party City, that is, the greatest utilization, and, 62%. That's 221 out of the 357 spaces on average. And unlike all the other properties, the trend line here actually has increased over time, over the 10 years. That's the dotted line, that's the trend line. Which is kind of interesting. The tenants really haven't changed all that much, over the past 10 years. Not so in some of the other locations, but certainly here, it's been pretty constant. There's a lot of commercial space in this, area. So there's not much of an opportunity here, and you can see, even during COVID, when it went down from 70%, it only dipped to 65, and then back up. The most recent date and a data point is this past March. I can refresh this in the fall when we get a new data point available. The next one on page 7 is, Trader Joe's, Panera's, Stilson. 57% is the average. And it's pretty solid, pretty steady. It hasn't increased. The trend line is about the same as it was 10 years ago. Some ups and downs, obviously dipping below during COVID, 2021, 22, and still dipping down a bit. But, you know, we're just talking averages here. And so, again, there's, not a lot of opportunity there. Another favorite, place to shop, Whole Foods, Petco's, on Grassmere, where CVS is. And again, pretty constant, but a lot of variability, and that probably has to do with when Whole Foods, before Whole Foods moved in. They haven't been there 10 years, I don't think, have they? Have they been there 10 years?
Yeah.
Maybe they have, yeah. So, a lot of variability, but, they're pretty constant at, 50%, 51%. But again, that's only 180 spaces we're talking about out of 350. So, again, that's a pretty sprawling, piece of property. The Save the Children, property on Kings Highway, is really weird because of the dips. They had nobody parking there back, basically, on a couple of, weekends. So those are probably outliers. That's why that chart dips so much. And this is not including the 146, covered parking spaces that they have in the garage. So really, their capacity is obviously bigger. I think there may be an opportunity there for Save the Children. Here's their space. This is the, aerial view of Save the Children, and you can see, there in the lower left-hand corner, that tends to be the least utilized, area. You can't see the covered, obviously, but towards the front, where Kings Highway is, where the entrance is, that's more heavily utilized. And again, there may be 100, 150 spaces at play, perhaps not, but again, that gives you a
And-
feel. Yes,
And
go
what's
ahead.
what's the occupancy in that building though? Like, do you know about the
I was there the
occupancy
other
numbers?
day.
They do have.
Like-
They're-
Is it all
pretty-
rented out?
No, they're not quite.
They're not, but they've got an anchor tenant,
Yeah.
and they had one before, and they've had one, I mean, with some periods of vacancies, but, you know, obviously Save the Children is the anchor tenant. They're pretty well occupied. I would say they're 70 to 80% occupied.
Yeah, they're, yeah.
From the looks of it, when I
Okay.
walked in, saw the board in the lobby. So let's look at some of the places where there are opportunities. And so you mentioned Aldi's, and before that, it was, Kohl's. And I remember years before that, it was Caldor's, right? Anybody else remember when it was Caldor's?
Yep, I remember.
Right?
Yeah.
So here's the aerial view of Aldi's, 483 parking spaces, only 18% utilization, as you can see here. So it's kind of drifting down, but it never got very high to begin with. It bounces around in the low 20%, consistently, with some, you know, going from, 15 to 22. Not a lot of variability, so pretty steady. And I think there are a couple of opportunities here, as you can see on this page. Across the street on Greenfield Street, I remember parking there when Caldor's was open, to shop at Caldor's.
Wow.
that was used for overflow parking, and I don't know,
That's what it's there for.
that's what it's there
I've
for.
never seen anyone actually use it.
No one for years has used that, that's almost 100 spaces. Down in front, nobody wants to walk more than 600 feet, to get to where they go, from a park car, research shows. So nobody is parking in that second 146 oval, parking spaces down towards the car wash, and you've got Dunkin' Donuts down there. There, that's a lot of impervious surface with a lot of surface runoff. And so, and again, that plot on Greenfield, right next to the childcare, place is always empty. There's some semis there, truckers
Yep.
sleeping overnight, but that's about it, or delivery guys. Take a look at BJ's. Again, you can't see the underground, but, double that if you want, because that's, what's underground. And so you can see BJ's, 543 spaces, 19% utilization, so on average. And pretty much staying the same.
And did you count the back?
I didn't count the back. This is just the front, because nobody's parking in the back,
Even worse than that.
because there's no back entrance.
Right.
I mean, you can't get into the BJ's from the back, so who would park there? Not if you're going to BJ's. There are a lot of, food trucks who like to park on the right-hand side in the mornings to, resupply. But other than that, that space on the left there, that's about a third of their spaces.
BJ's
Again, that's storage.
BJ's has identified this is where they're.
Yeah, right, I
fueling
mean-
Station, they want to put a fueling.
And I've looked at Bullard Square right next to it, it's just, when you look at the over and under, here this is a big opportunity, there's no question. And
Our favorite.
Bob's Stores, before then, it was Grand Union, who remembers Grand Union was there for years, as an anchor tenant, right? Oh, yeah, well, I go back 50, so, in town. And Bob's Stores is, less and less, they're declining, their parking. So, and that has to do with vacancies, a lot of turnover, over there, past 10 years in terms of the leases there. Bob's has been going downhill, I'm surprised it's still open. There's a fitness center there. But needless to say, they're only at 28%, that they're using 68 spaces out of 338. There may be an opportunity, nobody's parking close to the post road and walking to Bob's, right, in that orange circle. Maybe that's an open space, a green space, opportunity. There's nobody's parking there. You've got the Midas Muffler Shop and the laundromat to the right of it. There is a little parking in the back of it, but again, I just focused on the parking in the lot itself. And then lastly, we come to, I think, my favorite parcel, which is this one, because it's just so neat. You've got a bowling alley that says, according to town regs, you need, 4 spaces per lane. There are 56 lanes, so that's 224 spaces they need. On an average day, I have the figures, it's, 17 or 18 people are parking there to bowl. And you can see that, they're trending down significantly. And again, they've got almost 800 uncovered spaces between Stop and Shop, Planet Fitness, Nutmeg Bowl. Fairfield County Bank is also sharing the property.
You got this one completely devoid of cars.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll get to that. Page 21, first of all, to your point, if you look at the bottom there, that is chained off, those 54 parking spaces. You can't get there now. Years ago, when I was counting cars there were some cars parked there to go bowl in the heyday of bowling, whenever that was. Certainly not now, or it's less so now. But adjacent to that is town-owned as open space. And so there's 54 parking spaces that nobody's using, they're chained off. There's 190 spaces that really is below grade, it's just for Nutmeg Bowl. You don't park there to go to Stop and Shop or to go to Planet Fitness. Before then, it was Walgreens, right? You don't go there to go to the bank. And I think there are significant opportunities, because the bank is 3,100 square feet, they're entitled to 19 spaces, they have 50 parking spaces. On average, there are 8 people parking there, for the 10 points, during the past 10 years I looked at. Nobody's parking down on Villa Avenue, those 55 parking spaces. Nobody you can count, there's 3 cars parked in that, rectangular space. So there's 200 spaces easily that, you know, again, it's all impervious surface, you got surface runoff, I mean, you know, it goes on and on. This is probably the poster child, for utilization. I mean, Stop and Shop, their utilization is about 24%, but on average, the property is much less. So I want to pause there, before I get to one final, area. Any thoughts or questions? What, does this sound reasonable, or, I mean, does it confirm?
This confirms what
We're trying to quantify and put data around it.
Yeah.
And then we'll see what we can do. I went a step further, because, you know, I commuted for 30 years before I retired in New York, and I commuted in days before this train station parking looked like this, when you had a 4-year waiting list, for a permit, right? And so, you know, train station parking spaces are smaller. They're, 8.5 feet by 18. They're not 9 feet by 18, according to town, code. And so I counted about 900 spaces, 886 spaces on just this, westbound side, that extends under Umpqua, to where, Tomlinson would be on your left, off screen there. And when you look at the trend line, and this may be the reason why Metro North and the MTA continues to, make noise about, reducing service cuts. They're gonna be more this fall, with the fact that people are working hybrid schedules. They're working at home 3 days, going in 2 days. A precipitous decline in usage. Although the average is high. I mean, it's, you know, it's over that 10-year period, it's 70%. But more recently, it's much less. Obviously, during COVID, it went down to 34%, 16% for those data points there. And I only chose weekdays. I didn't look at weekends to kind of skew the data. Although there was one Saturday that was 100% full. So I don't know what was going on in New York that day. But that's an outlier. Typically, Saturdays and Sundays, it's not included here, but I have that data. And so, I guess the state owns that, or
No.
the town? Does the town own it?
It's town.
Oh.
So we've looked at this as a potential development opportunity.
Well, yeah, I mean, here, I mean, you've got 100, almost 200 spaces. I mean, even if you just leased air rights and kept the parking and put something 2 to 3 stories over. You talk about, and this is in the TOD, right? This to me seems like a layup. So that, I threw that in just for good measure. So again, some observations. Lastly, we saw a decline, I saw a decline in the usage, not unsurprisingly due to COVID, from 42% to 26%. It's gone back up, the average gone back up to 32%. We need another data point or two later this year, early next year, to see if that trend continues on average. And again, 3 properties with the greatest parking capacity have only a utilization of 20% on average, and it doesn't really skew much higher or lower. So I think there are opportunities. Hopefully this has pointed that out. Again, I was encouraged that the POCD does indicate that they, you know, want to move to 4 per thousand rather than 5, which is a great step in the right direction. And so maybe it could even be lower, perhaps 3, but that's for another time. So
it seems, yeah, and the other thing that we've talked with staff about is at a certain point, you don't need to keep adding parking.
right.
You know, above a certain threshold, there's no need to keep piling on, because you've already reached saturation point. And so I think that's the other recommendation we'd make, which is looking at our parking ratios and adjusting those.
That's good. And that's something we've done.
These multi-tenanted plazas,
Well,
where they just add up, you know, this number of parking.
Fairfield
spaces.
Center is a perfect example of that. And I did not attempt, although it would be a really good exercise, to look at the parking off-street that we have between Beach Road and Reef Road behind, you know, the buildings, the brick walk and adjacent to that. Obviously, a different mix of tenants with a lot of more restaurants that have their own, requirements, versus commercial retail. That would be interesting, and that's a lot of shared. I mean, you can't really pull one field card for that expanse.
I think this really documents what we had assumed.
What we thought,
Right.
yeah, right, I mean,
If you ask people on the street,
yeah.
where are places that are tremendously overparked, they would identify these locations.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just personal observation, we'll drive around and, you know, different days. Now seasonally, obviously.
You have data.
Thanksgiving or so forth, but I've got the data.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So that is it.
I know this is of interest to, I would assume, the Economic Development Commission has talked about this as well. But also, I would think, people like flood and erosion control, they would be very interested as well.
Wetlands,
Just because you
conservation.
identified impervious surface, you could reduce this and reduce the amount of water that's going into our system.
Yeah.
Which is a conversation I just had today with the town engineer about a project. He's talking about, planting areas to reduce runoff for a small patio, and it's like, hey, look at these.
The Bob's store would be
These are bigger.
a perfect
Right.
example of some green space, plantings, rip up the pavement, and then maybe in other places, put in at least, pervious pavers, which I don't think we make a lot of use of. I think most of these properties
Train
are.
station has done some, but.
They have some in the train station? Okay. Yeah, so really interesting,
Great
look
job.
at that. So, thank you.
Yeah, really great
Yeah.
job. I am so impressed.
Great work.
Do you wanna join our technical assistance?
Sure.
Yes.
Great.
Would you mind if I share this
Oh,
with some other groups?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
And,
certainly,
and my colleagues in planning and zoning.
well, we had a preliminary discussion with them,
Oh.
where we kind of just looked at, 800 Villa and kind of a straw man. And
Right.
Herb and I and Mark met with Emmeline and Jim maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and, we're all in the same wavelength, certainly.
This really,
But this, so by all means,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'll email everyone the PDF of the document, so you'll have it electronically.
awesome, good work.
Perfect. So back to the outreach plan that we had talked about, these are just some thoughts that we had some early discussion with Bob and I, and we weren't able to hook up with Janice, but Janice would be part of our group as well. Did I give you one of these?
Yep.
Everybody has one?
I have them reserved, yeah.
So I apologize for those folks who are online, but I think you'll get a feel for what we're talking about, and we can make a copy of this too if we decide it makes sense to go in this direction. But this is just really basically a discussion draft of the approach that we might take, in terms of outreach. So, the first step was to get ready for the ADU seminar. And so we were shooting for, maybe late October to do it, so we'd have some lead up to that. So those are the first two bullets here, the lead up and then the actual conduct of the ADU seminar. And then, and then we would start to also begin preparation for this, this seminar, broader seminar on the Affordable Housing Committee's work, what we're doing, what the role of the committee is, and so forth. And we would begin doing that after the election and do that up until the first part of next year. During this time, the H-Friendly Fairfield group is now meeting. The advisory team has had several meetings, and they're going to start meeting twice a month beginning in September. And it's pretty clear from the survey that we just conducted that housing will be a major issue. If we have a minute, I can talk about some of the results of that survey, but it's going to be a major issue and clearly a priority domain. So this is an opportunity for the H-Friendly Fairfield group to really be advocates for what we're trying to accomplish in the area of housing. So what we could do is also start briefing that group and supporting that group in terms of their efforts on housing. Then, just thinking ahead that maybe middle of the first quarter might be a good time to start going, public in a big way in terms of having a seminar. There's so much to talk about that it could even be possibly something we could break into 2 seminars. Maybe, what the committee's done so far, and then where do we go from here? And, where we go from here would certainly include, the Housing Trust Fund and getting as much support behind affordable housing and the Housing Trust Fund as we eventually can. We always do a report to the RTM in the spring, and maybe we could go beyond that.
Actually earlier.
Earlier in the spring?
Yeah.
Okay. early in second quarter.
No.
No,
We
late
do it
first
right-
quarter, it's like
We were actually required to do it,
March?
in the beginning of the year, so we typically will come in.
I meant early first quarter.
All right,
Yeah.
right, not second.
Spoke.
Which ties in, you know, with your conversation, when you're preparing, materials on the work of the Affordable Housing Committee, that's typically part of the report to the RTM, so it could dovetail nicely with broader conversation to the community as part of that, to other groups besides the RTM. Doesn't have the broadest audience, I mean, we provide the report in committee, they ask questions, but I don't think it gets a broad distribution beyond the 40 members on the RTM.
That's that would, so we would go beyond just that annual report, and we'll change that from spring until early 2024, and then in connection with that, go beyond that, with the idea of really raising this issue more broadly for the community, trying to dispel some notions about, you know, affordable housing is bad.
Yeah.
And just get people behind us to the greatest extent possible.
You know, to that point, I think, Emily Gordon from Stanford, in our conversation, mentioned that they had more success, or saw less resistance, when they were promoting senior housing. That was affordable housing.
Yeah.
But, so just the terminology, different nomenclature, you know, and that resonated better, more broadly with folks than affordable housing. We may need a new language.
Also, we did a survey, before we did the affordable housing plan, and there's definitely more empathy on the part of the community toward
Yes.
senior housing.
Yeah.
And even, it's affordable housing for families, that's really the red flag we found out.
Yes, yes.
So, we've got work to do. But as much as we think we've made progress, we certainly got work to do.
The only other comment I would make is, I think there is an opportunity with, and we've talked about this, publicize the Housing Trust Fund. I know Bob's done some work in terms of laying out a brochure.
Right.
But with the groundbreaking scheduled for after Labor Day for
Yes.
a project with Habitat,
Mhm.
I think it's a tremendous opportunity to emphasize the work of the Housing Trust Fund to making that happen. And, I know there'll be a lot of support within the community for that project, so,
Yeah.
again, we might be able to enlist others to help us identify, either provide resources, either monetary or, you know, identify opportunities, underutilized lots in town that we're able to partner with a group like Habitat or Habitat themselves to do other projects. You know, if we can kind of finish up that brochure, and it's a lot, you've done a lot already, so I think we just need to look at it a little bit more and make sure it's
Yeah,
ready for
so we're
prime
referring
time.
to, it's just a one-page flyer.
Yeah.
I'll send it around, I mean, I've gotten your comments, I may have gotten some from you, Mark, but I think we're 90% there.
Yeah, maybe we just
We could,
make it prettied up with some pictures, and.
oh, yeah, I wasn't thinking of a bifold necessarily, but that would lend itself to a bifold. So if you have pictures, send them to me, I can repurpose it as perhaps a bifold.
Pictures I have of the site are not so pretty right now.
Well, that's the before.
Yeah, before, right.
Right? We'll save a space for after.
We will definitely add that,
Yeah.
kind of an oversight, so we'll add that, and then we'll send it around to everybody for additional comments, but in the meantime, we'll get going.
The other thing I think
Janice and Bob and I, we're going to meet soon.
maybe your group would consider, and I'm sure we can probably secure some funding in the budget or elsewhere for it, is maybe we wanna focus not just on doing workshops or seminars or materials, maybe there's other mediums that we can use to help tell a story. A video or something that would actually
Perhaps, yeah.
talk to folks who have
Yeah.
made,
Do some
you know,
interviews.
utilized,
Yeah.
Whether it's an ADU or, you know, some of the affordable homeownership units we've built, or whatever
Yeah.
that might be.
Yeah.
I think that we can humanize it and also.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
you know, it's just a different medium that we could then post as well. Not everyone wants to go to a workshop or
Yeah.
seminar, so.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen the video that Jocelyn has on?
I haven't, so
There's
maybe
a
we can share
really,
that.
I mean, it's more oriented
Yep.
towards a rural community, but there's a really great video. I think that the Kent Affordable Housing Commission
Yep.
sort of, they, commissioned it, the video, with a little bit of grant funding.
Where do they get the grant funding from?
They got it from the Health Foundation,
Oh,
Health
okay.
Foundation was giving grants to their communities for communication around affordable housing, but another source for sure.
And then I know, I don't remember who mentioned it on this committee, but we also talked about doing some, you know, when we had some materials ready, we could also do some pop-up. Either at, you know, this market or something like that, where we can actually have a presence and also talk about some of the work that we've been.
Great. So we'll add that as well, the pop-up events, and we'll circulate to everybody for feedback.
Good outline.
So I think we can probably move to some of our more routine items. But we probably have we may have some non-routine items as well, Mark.
Yes, I have a couple of non-routine items. So I didn't, there really isn't any change in terms of the project pipeline and the moratorium status report. We're you know, tracking 3 projects that are nearing completion. In terms of set-aside developments, those are on, Black Rock Turnpike, is much closer. I've actually talked to the, owner and his marketing agent and informed them I need to see affirmative marketing plan and some more information as to when they'll be accepting applications in that process. But they're very close, you know, they're much closer to getting completion. So all these projects, the 3 that we're looking at, Park Avenue, Black Rock Turnpike, and Beacon Square, are gonna be completed early to middle next year. So that's, all 3, any combination of those really, will provide sufficient points that will meet the threshold requirements, for moratorium application, which, you know, for us is a major milestone, so it's at least we're making progress. So those are the, you know, the other set-aside developments that we've, the ones more recently on Berkeley, was denied and is on appeal, as is the one on Umpqua, 50 Umpqua, which, you know, I had hopes for that we could come up with some, happy middle ground where this is the one that, next to community.
Next to the community center,
Which is 100% residential, you know, it's kind of a poison pill type project. In any event, you know, those are all on appeal, based on directions by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So, that's it for those developments. There are a couple of, POD, mixed use, inclusionary, the subject to our inclusionary zoning requirements that we're tracking. Obviously, the 71 units, part of the Accurate Builders, the Fairfield Metro Center project, the first phase, building number 4, is under construction. If you've been there, they're framing out the second floor. And 81 Black Rock Turnpike in that same area. You know, that was the subject. We had secured a $3 million brownfield grant. I'm not sure that we'll actually be able to close on that brownfield grant because of all the conditions, the strings that are attached. So we're still working through that, but, you know, they're required to provide 12% affordable. We'd like to see that higher, and, you know, the thought was either through infusion of state monies to help with the cleanup or some other incentive that we could do something locally, we could push that number higher. I still think there's an opportunity to do that. And the developer is, open to having the conversation. So I think there is a conversation to be had. They're planning to go to the code review, which is an internal process right in the end of August, and that means they'll be planning their site plan approval sometime in September. So it is moving ahead. And those are there is one other project I think I've mentioned before. And they did secure a variance through the Zoning Board of Appeals. This is a very small, Class C office building off of Black Rock Turnpike. I've talked to the owner about doing a residential conversion. He was able to get a variance to allow for both floors. You know, typically in the commercial zone, we require ground floor commercial use and no more than 50% residential. He went to the Zoning Board of Appeals and they approved 100% residential for the project. So, you know, the conversion would be taking a small office building, two-story office building, and converting it to 18 units of residential, of which a percentage would be affordable.
Is it the one opposite CVS?
Next to McDonald's. Yeah, it's on,
Katona?
Katona. It's Katona. Yeah. So, again, been working with the property owner for a while. He's very methodical, but they're planning to present for code review and then zoning, approval later. And again, the requirement is 10%, right? But I had conversations with the Housing Development Fund and the property owner about, you know, providing some financing for the project in exchange for a higher percentage of affordable and perhaps, you know, deeper affordability than what we typically.
Walking distance to.
It would be
Yeah,
that's a good location.
It is a perfect
location.
location.
Yeah,
Perfect
Yeah.
building for conversion and a perfect
right,
location
this is
for this
already a
type.
building.
Yeah.
It's not a single family house.
Yeah, so originally he was getting advice like knock it down, build an 830G, and we're like, no. Let's work with the existing building. And I think he's come around and that's his approach right now, so. All those present really great opportunities for us to add to our inventory. Does anyone have any questions on any other projects that I may have omited?
St. Emery's, are they?
Which
still
one?
on the- St. Emery's, are they still on the?
You know,
Or-
I don't, it's really, it seems to be not going anywhere,
Right.
but, Housing Authority has expressed interest in making any headway, so I've kind of put that on the back burner. The Parkview Commons, they said we did issue an RFQ for development partners. We currently own 4 lots, 2 of which are completely vacant. One will be vacant at the end of this month, and one is a month-to-month tenant that I've told her, it's like, you have about a year, so let's think about where we might be going next. There was a property that is in foreclosure, 376 Quincy. You had authorized allocation of monies to acquire it. Foreclosure sale was scheduled for this past Saturday. It was canceled due to and I had actually got the deposit check in hand, so I was prepared to go there. It was canceled on Friday due, the owner had filed bankruptcy yet again. This is his 3rd filing. So it's a delay tactic. It's unfortunate. I've talked to him, and I feel really badly for the family, but I've not been able to make any headway with the owner and the bank in terms of doing some kind of structured short sale, and there are other creditors besides the bank, which, you know, the foreclosure action would take care of all that. And so my concern has been, you know, the longer this bigger the debt he owes to the bank, he's not making any payments. So at the end of the day, he may not have anything left in terms of equity in the house, which, you know, I guess if he's not paying the mortgage, hopefully he's putting that money someplace else that he can use some other purpose. So at some point, 376 will be auctioned off, if you will, and we're in a position to, do that, acquire it, and that would give us 3 contiguous lots, which is what we've been looking for. And then, one of the other owners, contacted me today and said, hey, I really need to sell my house, do you wanna buy it? And so I said, well, we're not quite there yet, but, it's in line with these other ones, not totally contiguous. Of course, there's somebody in the middle. But I think as we go forward and identify our development partner, there might be other funds that we can bring into play here. And so that would be, if we could do, 5 and maybe 6 lots, that would be good. So the plan would be to tear them down and build new duplexes, triplexes in their place.
Great, that's awesome.
Sure.
At the correct flood elevation,
Yeah.
so we don't have to do flood insurance, so that's still the plan. And then on Greenfield Street, if anyone's driven past the site, you'll notice that it's been, cleared, trees have been removed. They still have to do site grading to make it, and that's scheduled for the next couple weeks. They're gonna do some rough site, grading. And then we'll be in line to do a groundbreaking after the Labor Day, and, there'll be station work, and then everyone can swing a hammer, so that's where we are on that. And the only other report Housing Trust Fund, we have a balance of $778,703, of which we have in our reserve for Parkview Commons acquisition, $319,000, less, that's net of the deposit we drew down in anticipation of this sale, leaving an adjusted balance of $459,703. And if you're looking at, compared to last month, it is a reduction bigger than the actual use of the deposit money. Not that I went out on a spending spree, but, the comptroller informed me as they were closing the books last year that they had booked a bond, planning and zoning bond for a project to our Housing Trust Fund accidentally. So she had to reverse that. It was a big bond. It was a $110,000 bond. So she pulled that out and put it back in the right place. Our numbers for the last few months have been inflated by that.
Gotcha.
So now they've been adjusted. I did see that, and then, so that's where we are. So it's about half, $500,000 that we have uncommitted. And so I'll pause there if anyone had any questions on any of that stuff.
You mentioned, conversions from commercial to residential. Do you have a feel of what the vacancy rate is in town, commercial?
Sure,
vacancy
I
rate?
do.
And is it,
It's not high.
it's not high?
Office is probably, it depends on the class, but overall, it's in the low teens. So it's actually quite low. And part of it is, we just don't have a huge, office submarket anymore.
Right.
There's not a lot of square footage.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of huge conversion opportunities anyway.
Yeah.
This is fairly unique. If GE had actually hit the market, that was probably the more likely, option, absent, what happened with Sacred Heart. The inquiries we were getting were residential. That's what Trumbull went through with some of their larger corporate office parks that weren't centrally located. Everyone wanted the suburban office park at one point. Now no one wants that. They want to be closer where the action is, downtown, that type of thing. So now a lot of those, in Trumbull particularly, have seen they had a huge, it was like 50% vacancy rate, even higher. And they got it back under control by converting a lot of those to residential. Or, so they came off the books. We haven't seen that, it's just, other than the G,
Yeah.
the institution. So that's, yeah, there isn't a lot of vacancy out there across the board.
But you do have some retailers who have gone, like Bed Bath & Beyond.
Bed Bath
Most
& Beyond,
recent.
yeah, we've gotten, you know, most of those, we've gotten lots of inquiries for.
Yeah.
It's just the owner is, you know, I don't own it, so I can't do the lease deal, but,
Yeah.
and, you know, I'm sure they're biding their time, you know. Part of it initially was taking repossession of the property from Bed Bath & Beyond was in bankruptcy, but they still had leases, so they still had,
Mhm.
you know, they didn't have possession of the property yet
Mhm.
from Bed Bath & Beyond, but now they are actively working it.
Yeah. You have a couple of auto dealers.
But, you know, the one,
Kings Highway
the big
East
one I'm
is-
thinking of is the theater.
Well, the
and-
theater, but then you've also got that vacant lot on Kings Highway East across from Villa. That was automotive
Yeah, and-
for
and that-
forever. I forget who was, that,
Volkswagen,
was it VW or
Long time
Nissan?
ago.
So 355, and we've met with, the owner developer of that, and they are looking at doing some kind of, initially it was residential, we said, no, you need to do mixed use here.
Mhm.
So they're looking at mixed use, and their plans are very early on, I don't even,
Really?
they're just awful. But, you know, the concept is fine, it's just, you know, they need design side. But the issue with that site is, it's twofold, it's in a floodplain,
Right,
No.
Rooster,
Is
Next
it the
to
Rooster
Rooster
River?
River.
Rooster River, okay.
and
Yeah.
it's more contaminated you would guess,
Oh,
oh, really?
with PCBs actionable at EPA, threshold. So, it's a complicated site,
yeah. More so than the Hyundai one, the Belize?
Yes.
Site down, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And, so they've been working their way through the regulatory agencies, and I think they have some direction now, which is the preferred remediation strategy to address most of these sites is to cap.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so, by capping, you're raising the profile of the site, and they're saying, well, we raise it just a little bit more, we'll be above the flood elevation, which is true, but you're displacing floodplain. So then you have to figure out what's the impact of that, and whether, so they've gotten direction, basically, they're saying the remediation is more, you know, the most important element, so remediate the site, we'll deal with the floodplain issues, but we still have to deal with the floodplain issues. So it is in process, but it seems like it's gonna be like a couple of years yet.
Yeah.
And it would be a great candidate for brownfield funding,
Right, yeah.
but again, you have to go into these things with your, and not that we didn't tell the development partners, but, you know, the monies come with strings, and you have to, weigh that. So, you know, that's part of it. The only other thing I wanted to report, tonight was we have, well, a couple things. One, we have and I talked to a few of you privately, we have a really great opportunity, to acquire a 4-family unit in Southport. And, you know, I've talked to the owner. The owner would like to preserve existing structure, you know, some of the, you know, if she were to sell it on the open market, some of the more likely redevelopment plans would be to knock it down and build something new. And, you know, she kinda likes the building, so, and seems very, community-minded. She had lived in town for many, many years, has fond memories of Southport. It's an investment property for her, so she had, you know, there are 4 one-bedrooms, and they were rented quite reasonably, for this market. So when she told me what they're renting for, they're not quite affordable in that, but they're very, very close. And so, you know, we can't, obviously, the town's not an owner, manager of rental properties, but I did, call the housing authority and said, would you be interested? And Carol, did run some numbers today and says, yes, we would be very interested. And so the plan would be to go back, and we're not talking so the property currently has a appraised value on our books at like $1 million, and her appraisal is like $1.4 million, let's say. She has indicated that she has, she would be receptive to, you know, taking less than the market value, if we were trying to, you know, meet some other community objectives, like preserving the unit and making units affordable. So I feel like there's some room here. So the idea would be whether it's a soft commitment from the Housing Trust Fund, because Carol's plan would be either the project base, some vouchers there, and/or secure funding from DOH, CHAFA for this. It can be helpful for us to provide a soft commitment letter for that. But she's not asking us really, I've said we could. You know, we've done other multifamily acquisitions to the tune of like $25,000 to $30,000 per unit, which I think is pretty cheap if we get 4 units here. And she's talking about, you know, doing 2 at 80% and 2 at 40%, which would be truly affordable in Southport.
Yeah, wow.
So it really sounds like a tremendous opportunity. You know, I wanted to let you know that that's something we're working on. And I will keep you posted. And then the only other thing I wanted to share, and I have Aisha to thank, is, you know, she pointed out, you know, we last year had considered whether or not to participate in a program sponsored through NYU Furman Center. They do a housing solutions lab. It's an application-driven process, and their idea is to do a peer-to-peer exchange with some technical assistance provided from folks at NYU to assist communities in furthering their affordable housing goals. And, you know, I talked to Emmeline Harrigan, our assistant planner, and Carol Martin last year, and there was interest. It requires, basically, it's an intensive 6-week program where they do some very do workshops, and then, you know, kind of work with you on some issues that you're experiencing here locally. But it's a collaborative team effort. So it's an application-driven process, national. We're kind of on the small end, you know. Communities, mid-sized cities, 50,000 to 500,000 in population, so we're kind of on the small end of that. And we're not quite as, you know, if you read through the application materials, we're maybe a little bit more advanced than some of the other communities they work with. But, you know, I think it's something we might want to kick the tires on again, or at least, I thought I did sign up for their newsletter, and I didn't get notice of this.
Oh, really?
Anyway, that's something else that's out there.
The application is coming up pretty soon.
It's due in September.
Yeah, September 7th. But I don't think it's a very
Didn't look
heavy
complicated.
application. And there's also an opportunity for towns to partner together on it, if you talk about regional or multi.
That could be harder to arrange
Yeah.
in a short period of time, but
Yeah.
but I think it's a good idea. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, what appeals to me, I think what we've been struggling with a little bit, we did a lot in our first 2014 plan. We implemented a lot of strategies and action steps as part of that, and a lot of communities are now catching up to where we are, but now we're, you know, trying to refine some of those approaches and add to our tools, and it's a bit harder, and, you know, we're reaching out to other communities and saying, oh, how do you do this? How do you solve that problem? That seems to be what where we're at. And, you know, so the peer-to-peer exchange does appeal to me, and having different people that think through these things and say, have you tried this?
Right.
So, I don't have a specific ask.
Anything else for tonight that we need to address? Anyone?
What are the next steps on the parking analysis, do you think? I
Um,
will share that with,
I would definitely share it with, planning. Staff and,
I think I'll share it with their consultant too, I mean,
well, by all means.
Yeah. And so much is like what we back to is, you know, DOC data on, and then come in with a flurry of, regulation amendments, a lot of stuff backed up for that.
And you also share it with the economic development.
Yeah, I think economic development, I'm thinking, you know, again, when it does get to a regulatory amendment, you know, the
Right.
more people we have that are, you know, in support, I would think, you know, flood erosion control.
Erosion and inland wetlands, and,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
The conversation we had, a little tiny bit of,
yeah,
you know, we're talking about huge parking lots that are
Yeah.
adding so much to, and some of these are in areas that are quite sensitive in terms of being in a,
right,
area that, a watershed that
yeah,
has
the runoff.
issues.
There's also heat.
Yeah,
Oh,
Like
yeah,
everything
yeah,
about
yeah,
urban
exactly,
heat
yeah.
island.
No
Right.
trees, there's
Probably
no
is
tree,
the
you didn't see a
biggest,
tree in any of those parking lots.
you know, impact, actually,
Right,
is
Yeah.
the heat,
No
even more
shade.
than water.
Sustainable Fairfield too, so, you know, there's probably a lot of folks that we can, you know, list in support of this.
Who do we not want to share it with?
Yeah, sure, probably.
Okay, if we don't have anything else,
The next thing would be look for an invite for the Habitat for right after Labor Day. Working on a date right now, but
maybe also in view of the, October, ADU, it may not be too early to see if we can go back to the Fairfield Museum.
yeah,
and
you
see what
know,
their schedule is, like,
I thought of that, and, you know, would you be open to perhaps, you know, I don't know if there are other areas, like, if we did something at the Pequot Library, for example, Southport, with, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's not as AV friendly,
mhm. Well, we were pretty low tech, I think,
yeah.
by and large, the panelists, I mean,
I mean, I love
Really
the
that side.
museum, but, you know, and it's fairly central,
it's fairly central, yeah.
but I was just wondering if we'd be open to changes, you know.
Absolutely, yeah, what other comes to mind, I think,
I'll check with them first, to see dates.
thinking of probably, when we say late, the week of, the 23rd or the 30th.
hey, anybody on Zoom have any, questions or observations or thoughts?
Hi, this is Alyssa Kent. I just had a couple questions. One was in regards to moratorium and your projections for where we are and when we might hit moratorium. I was wondering if you have any projections for how many potential projects are in development that are approved under 830G that may also then contribute to the next moratorium, and then what our
Yeah.
goal is, and the delta between those two, and how we can make some informed decisions with that information, using what we know by how many go into the pipeline and then how many eventually get CO'd.
Yeah, we do have, it's not as refined as the spreadsheet I received from Westport, but we're working on that. We do have a development pipeline, but I think that would be our next step, which is, you know, it's great we're gonna get to
Right.
that point here, but then we're gonna have, other projects that we can then look toward the next year. Unlike most of the communities that have achieved a moratorium to date, Fairfield is a much bigger community with 20,000 plus housing units. So even though the threshold is lower for the second subsequent moratorium, it's still a pretty big number. So I haven't done it yet, Lisa, but that's on my to-do list for sure.
Okay, yeah, it would be interesting to see that as we start to, I mean, the time is now to be planning for the next moratorium,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So, you know, I'm hoping that we can, as a town, develop some lofty, quick goals, maybe even some of these places where we have, big parking lots, making some deals, and getting creative with tax structure, with the ownership of those lots, to make better use of them and think big picture there. I love that analysis that was presented.
Believe where we're going with it.
Yeah, good. Other question, when, and this is not related to this group specifically, but when is the, sorry, I'm blanking on the name, the, planning and, development, plan of conservation and development going to be available to the public?
I hope soon. I believe the draft has been circulated to, internally to the staff and to planning and zoning commission members. Not that I've seen that yet, but.
I've seen it.
Yeah,
In fact, I got a copy of it. Alexa Harrison.
I was looking for it the other day.
Oh, yeah. I have it with me. It's,
So it is.
it is out in
yeah.
the public. I mean, she sent it to her email.
Oh,
Oh, okay. I'm not sure how you find
It
it,
is
but.
now.
hey, we'll read it together.
And it's a
Good.
much better read than the 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
much
good,
better.
because the
Much better.
2016, yeah,
Oh,
I'm hoping it is. And I just want to kind of make a statement, you know, I have young kids. I think, probably everyone in the room and on the call is aware of the school redistricting. And I think, I think a silver lining of this is going to be, we're going to have a lot more interested people in housing opportunity and affordable housing. But I think there's going to be a lot of emphasis on looking at what has happened and what is happening to potentially 1,000 plus kids next year and having to move schools, and priorities of the population that is attuned to that. And it's, you know, I think, you know, the plan of conservation and development is a perfect place to look back on how we got where we are. And it's really unfortunate, you know,
Right.
circumstance that we're all in. And there's a lot of people that are really upset. And, you know, as somebody that's been advocating for affordable housing for a long time, I'm just happy to have a lot of new people that are interested. But it's unfortunate that it's come to that, so.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
I would tell you, the most robust section in the plan of conservation development draft is housing.
Housing.
It's absolute, and it's 80% of what's in our plan.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of,
Quite a
there's
bit.
some really good things in there,
so-
and, there are actually a few slight differences from what they had spoken with us
Yeah.
about in terms of the.
So that's very
reasons.
encouraging, and it was a very thoughtful and engaging process to arrive at this draft in terms of engaging others. I think it's a really good job.
It's a lengthy document, I mean, it's 70.
It's shorter than the 2016
Okay,
document.
75 pages of very fine print, but there's a lot of good, there's a lot of good
Really
information.
good.
I've only read a
Yeah. No,
Plus than Bob has,
it's,
but it's good information.
really is impressive. And we may want to have, at some point, for the committee's benefit, maybe Emmeline could drop by or.
I was just,
or Jim,
wondering.
and just focus on that section,
Yeah.
because it really is robust. It's
Yeah.
4 or 5 pages,
That's a
and
great idea.
much of it lifted from our plan.
Yeah.
So,
Well, maybe September would be a good time to do
Sure.
that.
probably before the public hearing.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Fairfield Senior Advocates even got a mention.
Wow. Well, thank you, Alyssa. I'll track that down. I'll get it to you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, if no one else has any, comments or questions, I guess we can entertain a motion for adjournment.
Right,
moved.
fine. Very good. Thank you all.
Seconded.
Okay, second.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks for being part of it. I think we set a record.